Republican Congressman Michael Turner of Ohio, whose congressional district includes Dayton, has endorsed a ban on military-style weapons. The congressman has an A rating from the NRA and voted against a bill to expand background checks earlier this year. But Congressman Turner released a statement yesterday announcing his support for restricting the sale of military-style weapons to civilians. He's also called for a magazine limit and red flag legislation. This weekend's mass shooting in Dayton was personal for the congressman. Not only does the city fall under his district, but his daughter and a family friend were also across the street from where the shooting began on Sunday morning. The congressman tweeted, quote, "My daughter and friend fled into the Oregon district and contacted me at 2 a.m. As they ran home, I followed their progress and prayed for them and our community. Thank you to Dayton police for their bravery in stopping this evil." The Republican governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, is asking state lawmakers to take action on a series of measures that would help fight gun violence. His list of policy proposals includes a red flag law, which allows family members or police to seek the removal of firearms from individuals whom they fear could cause harm to themselves or others. DeWine is urging state lawmakers to pass background checks for gun sales and to provide money to strengthen soft targets like the Oregon district, where this weekend's mass shooting took place. The governor is calling for improved access to mental health treatment. He's asking that the Ohio Department of Public Safety increase its monitoring of social media. And the governor also wants to increase the penalties for anyone who breaks the law when it comes to buying, selling, or owning firearms. And red flag laws are picking up momentum with some Republican members of Congress in Washington. According to the New York Times, GOP lawmakers are coalescing around legislation to help law enforcement take guns from those who pose an imminent danger. If signed into law, it would be the most significant gun control legislation in 2 decades. In the Senate, where a background checks bill failed in 2013 after 26 children and staff members were gunned down at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, red flag laws may be the only gun-related measure that could squeeze through. Senator John Thune of South Dakota told his hometown newspaper that he was confident Congress will be able to find common ground on the so-called red flag issue. Senator Lindsey Graham has already proposed legislation that would offer federal grants to states to help them enact and enforce red flag laws, also known as extreme risk protection orders.
So, Yamiche, these are all good first steps, but it's also important to note that every one of these issues should have been passed years ago. And when they pass now, most of them are what we'd call in Congress 90-10 issues. 90% of Americans support, only 10% oppose. You could also say that about expanded background checks and so many other gun measures that Republicans have deliberately killed time and time again. So are we finally starting to see the iceberg break up a bit and starting to see some gun safety measures start to make it through the legislative process?
We're starting to see at least some action on gun issues and gun law changes. But I think what I took away after spending some time in Dayton, first before the shooting and then after the shooting, was that people are in some ways really frustrated with the idea that lawmakers almost have to be personally touched before they feel moved. Do you think of Representative Turner? His daughter was across the street. That might now have really kind of sunk in for him exactly how terrible these shootings are. And I spoke to a young man named Anthony Reynolds who said, you know, I wasn't paying attention to mass shootings, and when El Paso happened, I felt bad for them, but I didn't fear for my own safety. I went out and I was having a drink at the bar and I wasn't thinking about it. And then I was 10 feet away from someone with an assault rifle killing people right next to me. And I thought, well, why should he have that gun? And Reynolds said, you know, I now feel upset about the idea that, you know, it took for me to have to be running for my life for me to really sit down and say these laws need to change. So maybe it's because we now see back-to-back mass shootings that lawmakers in Washington and all over the country are saying, you know what, this is getting too much. We have to do this. But I remember covering Newtown, Connecticut, and going to some 20-something funerals and thinking this has to change everything. The world is going to shift. And what we all saw was the world didn't shift. And now I think people are starting to see, okay, we really, really need to do something, because Republicans are the ones, frankly, that are being blamed for most of this, because victims are looking at them and saying, you have to do something. I was in Dayton when the crowd was shouting, do something at the mayor, and that was a powerful moment. It was a moment where people felt fed up.
Well, and Katty, you have two things happening at once. You have the toxic combination of runaway gun, just massive firepower being put into the hands of civilians, where these large capacity magazines, and you have these military style weapons that I'm sure the congressman heard about his family members running away, and that shooter, I believe, had 100 bullets in his magazine. Now, everybody in the state of Ohio knows that you only need those if you're going out to hunt humans. If you're only, I mean, that's why people like Stan McChrystal, that's why so many military leaders say that those military-style weapons that were designed for combat in war, those military-style weapons should not be in civilians' hands. So you combine that with a racist, inflammatory, white supremacy that you're seeing flaring up in chants at Trump rallies, and people saying shoot Hispanics and talk of invasion. This is a double punch for Republicans, and people are looking squarely at them now.
Yeah, two forces seem to have come together in the country since the assault weapons ban expired in 2004. We've seen more and more of these military-style weapons on the streets of the United States, and an assumption that it's okay to have them with these huge magazines, like you say, that can kill people. We saw it in Dayton, 9 people killed in the space of 30 seconds. Imagine how many more might have been killed if that shooter had not been taken down that quickly. And then at the same time, you've got a culture of white supremacy, which the FBI has been monitoring, and which FBI agents are now saying, look, we need more resources to combat, because this is the threat that we are posing. So combine that white supremacy with the access to the assault weapons, and it is producing this moment where people are looking. And there is a different conversation happening after these two shootings, in which you do have some Republicans coming on board saying, OK, maybe we have to do something because we're seeing this backlash against us as a party.
Joe, we often and rightly talk about politicians who are in the grip of the NRA, so we ought to give credit to somebody like Michael Turner, a Republican from Ohio, who has a 93% NRA rating, has an A rating with the NRA, and is crossing the NRA by proposing an assault weapons ban, and will lose their support likely because of it. But it gets to the question you've talked about so many times, which is that the vast majority of members of the NRA want expanded background checks. They're for it. These are NRA members, and yet the NRA, the lobbyists in Washington, go out and spend millions of dollars lobbying against bills that would expand background checks. They've announced publicly that they're against universal background checks. Why is that? Why are 70% of the NRA members for that, and yet the people who represent them in Washington, go out and spend millions of dollars fighting against the very wishes of their membership?
Well, you know, I grew up in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia and Florida. I grew up around NRA members. I grew up with people that started going hunting with their fathers and grandfathers when they were 5 or 6 years old. Members of the NRA throughout their lifetime. And after Sandy Hook, after we all made some very impassioned pleas on expanded background checks and the banning of military-style weapons, all of them came up to me in church saying, hey, I don't need that to go deer hunting. Exactly. I don't need that to protect my family. I got enough firepower inside my house with my shotguns. Somebody walks through my door, you know, they're not going to get more than a couple of steps inside. And so all the NRA members I talked to after Sandy Hook were all telling me the same thing. We actually agree with you. We need expanded background checks to stop terrorists from getting their hands on weapons, to stop domestic abusers from getting their hands on weapons, to stop people who are mentally ill from getting their hands on weapons, right? And so you dig a little bit deeper, and what I found was it wasn't the NRA It wasn't even local NRA organizations. I kept talking about 3 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. that were doing the bidding of gun corporations, that were doing the bidding of people's bottom line on Wall Street, hedge fund companies that had come in and bought these gun companies. So they weren't working and fighting for NRA members. They were actually working for corporate interests. And that's when you saw all the self-dealing, Willie, and all that what we've seen over the past 6 months. It ended up being just 3 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. that didn't give a damn about NRA members. I don't know if you saw the breaking news last night, but they were thinking about buying Wayne LaPierre a mansion.
$6 million
along with
mansion,
his what?
Joe.
His how? Yeah, they were looking in, trying to buy Wayne LaPierre a $6 million mansion with the dues of hardworking NRA members, again, the majority of which want these expanded background checks. A lot of them say, hey, we don't need military-style weapons. So it's not about the NRA members. It is about 3 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. I think they fired one of them, so we may be down to 2 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. that are running it and that are doing it. It's all a scam. It's all for them to make money off of dues-paying members. And they don't give a damn, Mika, what their members want. They're thinking about $6 million mansions that they can pay for with dues. I mean, it's like the PTL Club. My grandmom gave money to the PTL Club to Jim and Tammy Faye Baker back in the 1970s, despite the fact we told her not to.
Oh, no.
But she kept doing it. And, of course, that ended up being a scam. I've been warning NRA members for years now that they're being scammed, and they're still being scammed with $6 million mansions, and with what, 1,000? How much, Willie, did these executives get in like Italian suits and like a couple $100,000 in Italian suits?
Tens of the private jets, all of it. But yeah, I mean, that's I guess the point of my question to you was, what is the political peril anymore of crossing the NRA? If Michael Turner can go out and speak to something like reducing the size of magazines and maybe getting rid of some semi-automatic weapons, what is the peril for him and others?
There's just not. I mean, again, you can take a case in South Florida. There's a member of Congress that represents the Palm Beach area and also Martin County. And Brian Mast, he supported after Parkland a ban on assault-style weapons, on military-style weapons. He won comfortably in one of the biggest down years for Republicans in American history, right? So this isn't going to have an impact. You know why? Because the overwhelming majority of people in all of these districts support expanded background checks to stop terrorists and domestic abusers and the mentally ill from getting guns. The majority of Americans support an end of selling like these large capacity magazines that have over 100, have 100 bullets in them. You don't need that. And these military style weapons, most hunters, every hunter I know says they don't need that. Nope. So, Mika, the peril is very, very small. And you also, because the NRA, the 3 lobbyists in Washington, D.C., were making each other rich with dues from hardworking Americans across this country, they didn't have the money to put into political campaigns in 2018. They were largely outspent for the first time in years. So again, more reason for people to vote their conscience and not be scared of the NRA.
Still ahead on Morning Joe, we're going to run through the latest polls on the Democrats in the race for president, where Elizabeth Warren seems to be on the move, how she stacks up against Joe Biden. Plus, President Trump has launched a sustained attack on Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and it's had an impact on her poll numbers, just not the impact the president had hoped for. We're going to show you those details ahead on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.